days of the 20th century continued to see rapid growth here. As the cattle industry thrived, Kansas City became a hub of agribusiness. But as an entry point to it, the West Bottoms have become problematic. The odor from the massive stockyards and packing plants greeted potential residents and business clients as they disembarked at Union Depot. The depot itself, now shabby and blackened by soot, sat across from rows of honky-tonks. What had once been a point of civic pride was a growing embarrassment. The need for a new train station was driven home by the catastrophic flood of 1903. So, as it had many times before, the city rose to the challenge, moving past the bluffs to the southern edge of the city limits, creating the greatest, perhaps most valued of its monumental landmarks, Union Station.
The people who decided where that station would be had something in mind that it would be more than a railroad terminal, because they built such an enormous station, probably the third largest in the world at the time. Its forms were a bit overscale to make it look larger and more important, and its spaces were grand. This building was symbolic of the idea of arrival and departure and how meaningful it is to people. It was sort of the rites of passage into a great city.
Efficiently designed to move vast amounts of cargo and passengers, Union Station derives much of its style from ancient Rome. This same classic design was often incorporated by architects into banks, colleges and universities, homes for the wealthy, and important government buildings like the nearby post office.
What better way to identify yourself with greatness than to utilize architecture that has been used for great buildings, symbolizing great ideas and a great government?
Once again, Kansas City seemed to bloom with opportunity, a Paris of the plains, attracting creative people who hoped to make their mark, if not their fortune. And not all of them were men.
Women architects were absolutely so rare, and particularly at the turn of the century, it was just not something that women were either invited in, were comfortable in, or even probably entered their heads that they wanted to get in. But we did have a few of them.
One was Mary Rockwell Hook. Her limestone cottages in the Sunset Hills area are located in a section known as the Hook Compound. And there were others, surprisingly successful in their day.
Mary Elizabeth Coulter was a maverick. She took nothing from nobody. She had an office in the Union Station for a while because she was designing the interior for Fred Harvey at the station, the restaurant, the gift stores, etc. And she did design the Westport Room, which was one of the most elite dining rooms in Kansas City. The other architect, of course, the one that was the most prolific, was an anomaly to me for a long time because I would run across the initials N.E. Peters, and that was a revelation to find out. It stood for Nell Elizabeth Peters. She was not formally trained as an architect, but she had the kind of eye for that. Her greatest contribution were really in apartments. She was responsible for some that were very possessive of the literary group. Some called them the Poet Apartments, just west of the plaza. Two others that she did were located on Broadway, Valentine's Broadway Hotel and the Ambassador Hotel. One of the things that she did that got away from her courtyard apartments was the Luzier's cosmetic building on Gillum. It was unusual in its extreme terracotta decor.
multifamily housing went bust, Peter's architectural opportunities diminished greatly, to the point where she eventually took work as a seamstress.
There's a story that's apparently authentic, that they began using the old linen drawings. They would scrub off the ink, cut them up for patterns. You know, you have to live.
Over the span of time that Nell Peters was the most active, she was responsible for $3 or $4 million worth of construction. With inflation, that's an enormous amount.
The terracotta work so prominent on Nell Peters' Luzier Cosmetics building was but one facet of a startling new development in architecture in the 1920s, Art Deco. Streamlined and modern, with dazzling flourishes and sharp angles, Art Deco was a visual complement to a bold, fast-paced, flashy new age, one populated by fast-dancing flappers, intercontinental airplane flights, and towering new buildings that seemed on the verge of touching the sky.
When people started figuring out that, you know, we could go up instead of out, that really changed the landscape of downtown.
We are lucky that we have saved quite a few of the buildings that were built during the 1925 to 1940 period of time. Probably the one that I could call world class would be the Municipal Auditorium.
There's several interesting things about the Municipal Auditorium. First of all, its aesthetics. It's a beautiful Art Deco building. It has stylized medallions on the exterior. But one of the interesting things about the building is the foundation for Municipal Auditorium, which is sizable, was done by hand. PWA workers were employed on this particular project for a number of months.
Very expensive for that period of time. I think the Municipal Auditorium cost something like $6.5 million during the Depression. In the early part of the 30s, Kansas City Power and Light was designed and built, which was the first real skyscraper. It was a beautiful, elegant building. They had a lantern at the top that changed colors, and it sort of was telling the rest of the world this is a big city.
The Power and Light building is an excellent example of a style of Art Deco that was influenced by the Southwest American Indian motifs, and that blended very well with the idea of light and power.
And there was more deco to come, in the form of 3 government buildings, all with slightly different styles, that converged in a civic center that remains intact along 12th Street.
The Civic Center always fascinated me because it turned out that those buildings were not designed from the start to be a trio. While I was still Chief Judge of the County Court, Harry Truman wanted to build a really fine courthouse. He was interested in architecture, and he literally toured at his own expense to look at new courthouses. He found one in Shreveport, Louisiana. He said, "I want to talk to the architect." Talked to the architect. Said, "Can you give me a drawing that makes it taller?" Yes. Got the drawing, came back, and he said, "That's our courthouse."
And he came back with these great ideas, and we passed a $50 million bond issue in the 30s, which was partly for roads in the county that Harry Truman sold. It was also to build the Jackson County Courthouse, and that was unheard of during the Depression. I mean, the fact that people would pass a $50 million bond issue is amazing.
But that building was built before the city had any idea where they were going to put a city hall. City Hall is more austere. Much of the same architects were involved. But if you look at the two, you get a dialogue between the two. And then the third building, the Municipal Courts building, as you look at it, each one has a different flavor, and yet they work together harmoniously.
These landmark structures took their place in the 30s alongside other recent arrivals, like Liberty Memorial. Dedicated in 1923, high across the hill from Union Station, it remains the largest Art Deco monument in the country. Further south was the Nelson Atkins Museum, built where Kansas City Star publisher William Rockwell Nelson's Oak Hall had previously stood. But in another part of town, a different kind of urban landmark was growing. Today, it is an important part of Kansas City's international image. But unlike most of the area, this city within a city was born without the benefit of economic clout or industrial muscle.
18th and Vine is an important part of the city's history. I think it's important to understand how that developed. The area around 18th and Vine was the center of the black community when they were legally segregated to living north of 27th Street and east of Paseo. Because of the limited boundary that the city placed on them, the density in that small area exceeded the density on the plaza today.
One of the big things about that whole area was that it contained lots of black businesses. I mean, you could just literally walk from block to block and just do about any kind of business that you needed in the black community. And clearly the reason for that is that you had an inhospitable attitude outside that community. So what it did was created a very strong community within itself in and around the 18th and Vine area. Basically what you found was frame houses, small frame houses, some of which still stand today, and 1- and 2-story brick storefront buildings that form the commercial district. You could walk down the street and you could smell the food and hear the music, and the next club down the street, taxis coming and going and streetcars rumbling by. Had to have been a pretty exciting venue.
Those swinging sounds of Kansas City jazz that emerged from 18th and Vine have shaped our civic identity, much like such visible monuments as the Hannibal Bridge, the County Courthouse, and Union Station, and what many consider our greatest engineering marvel of all, the city's system of parks and boulevards.